North Carolina, present day. The moment gravity took over, the ballroom went silent. My name is Victoria Holmes, and I am falling. Surrounded by white roses and the heavy scent of expensive champagne, I watch my brother's face blur as he shoves me from the stage. For 2 years, my family used my paralysis as a prop for his political campaign, erasing my truth to polish his image. They thought my silence was permanent, bought with guilt and duty. They were wrong. As I crash into the crystal centerpieces, I realize that this time, I won't just survive the fall. I'm going to make sure they land in the wreckage with me. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The matte black carbon fiber of my wheelchair looked like a bruise against the blinding white and gold decor of the country club ballroom. It was the only thing in the room that wasn't pretending to be perfect, and my mother hated it. I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my neck, the same way she used to look at a stain on the church carpet before services started. This wasn't just my brother's engagement party, it was the soft launch for his campaign for state representative. Every napkin, every centerpiece, and every smile was calculated. And I was the variable that didn't fit the algorithm. I had tried to stay in the periphery, hovering near a table of untouched hors d'oeuvres, but the gravitational pull of the Holmes family image was too strong. My brother Ethan stood at the center of the room, radiating that easy golden boy charm that had kept him out of detention in high school and out of jail later in life. He was laughing, his arm draped possessively around Caroline, his fiancée, who looked like she had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in politicians' wives. "Victoria, get over here." Ethan's voice boomed too loud, carrying the artificial warmth of a man who knows donors are watching. "We're doing the family photos. Can't do it without my baby sister." I didn't want to move. My stomach churned with a familiar mix of dread and nausea, but people were turning to look. The local press was there, snapping candid shots for the society pages. If I refused, I was the bitter, crippled sister ruining the moment. If I went, I was the prop. I unlocked my brakes and rolled forward, the rubber tires humming silently over the polished hardwood. When I reached the riser where they were staged, my mother leaned down, her smile fixed, but her voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear. "You're ruining the aesthetic, Victoria. That black chair darkens the whole image. Couldn't you have draped a white blanket over it?" "I'm not furniture, Mom," I said, keeping my voice low. Caroline clapped her hands, drawing attention. "Okay, everyone, squeeze in. Vic, honey, can you? Stand up for this one, please." The request hung in the air, absurd and cruel. "Caroline, I'm paralyzed, you know that." "Oh, stop it." She laughed, a brittle sound that grated against my ears. "Ethan told me you're making great progress. Just for a second. It's for the website. We want to show resilience, not disability." I looked at Ethan. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the camera, his smile tight. "Come on, Vic. Don't be dramatic. You've been working out. Just stand for the shot. Prove them wrong." "I can't balance, Ethan. My core muscles don't work," I said, gripping the rims of my wheels. "I am not doing this." Ethan's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. It was a look I knew well, the look of a golden child who was being denied his toy. He stepped off the riser, coming around behind my chair. The scent of bourbon hit me strong, expensive and terrifyingly familiar. "Here, let me help you," he announced to the room, playing the doting brother. "Ethan, don't," I warned, locking my elbows. "Up we go," he shouted. He grabbed me under the arms, his hands digging into my armpits, and violently yanked me upward. Physics is a cruel mistress. Without the muscles in my abdomen and lower back to stabilize me, my legs were dead weight. He hauled me up, but my center of gravity was non-existent. As soon as my wheels left the floor, my body swung forward like a pendulum. Ethan, drunker than he looked, stumbled backward, losing his grip. I didn't just fall, I launched. I tipped forward, arms flailing for something, anything to grab, but there was only air. I crashed chest first into the display table in front of the stage. The sound was deafening, the shattering of 36 glass vases, the heavy thud of my body hitting the wood, and the metallic clatter of my wheelchair tipping over on top of me. Pain exploded in my shoulder and cheek. Glass shards bit into my arms. I lay there in a pile of water-ruined flowers and jagged crystal, gasping for air. The room had gone dead silent. Then the screams started. "Don't move her!" A calm, authoritative voice cut through the shrieking panic. "Nobody touch her neck. This is a spinal patient." I couldn't move. My legs were twisted in the tablecloth, unseen and unfelt. Blood was dripping into my eye. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard a whisper from the crowd, a voice distinct and judgmental. "Isn't that the girl they said was faking? The one who sacrificed her brother's future?" I closed my eyes, the smell of bourbon and roses choking me. Faking. That was the narrative. That was the story they had built on my broken spine. But to understand how my own brother could throw me across a room in front of 100 witnesses and expect to get away with it, you have to rewind. You have to go back to before the glass, before the chair, to the night they decided I didn't matter. 2.5 years ago, I was 25, standing on 2 feet and running on pure caffeine and ambition. I was in my final year of nursing school and working shifts as an EMT trainee. I was strong physically and mentally. I prided myself on it. I could lift a stretcher, stabilize a trauma patient, and study for finals, all in a 24-hour window. My life was simple, defined by a clear American dream: work hard, serve my community, and buy a small house with a backyard where I could plant hydrangeas. I was the responsible one. That was my role in the Holmes ecosystem. My father, Pastor Daniel Holmes, preached sermons on Sunday about family values and integrity. But at home, the theology was different. At home, the religion was Ethan. Ethan was the sun we all orbited. He was charismatic, handsome, and utterly devoid of consequences. If Ethan failed a class, the teacher was biased. If Ethan got a speeding ticket, the speedometer was faulty. If Ethan started a fight at a bar, he was defending someone's honor. And I was the cleanup crew. I remember being 12 years old, sitting in the principal's office, admitting to breaking a window I hadn't touched because my parents told me Ethan couldn't have a mark on his record if he wanted to get into a good college. "Family sticks together, Victoria," my father had said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Sometimes one person has to sacrifice for the others. That's what love is, bearing the burden." I bore it. I bore it because I thought that's what good daughters did. I thought it was a temporary arrangement until Ethan grew up. I didn't realize I was being groomed to be a martyr. The dynamic was subtle, a slow drip of erasure. It was my mother, Marilyn, taking money from my savings jar to pay for Ethan's suit for a dance. It was my father canceling my birthday dinner because Ethan had a crisis with a girlfriend. I learned to make myself small so Ethan could be big. I thought I was being supportive. I didn't see the predator in the house until it was too late. The seed of the end was planted on a rainy Tuesday in November. I hadn't wanted to go out. I had an exam the next morning. But Ethan had called, sounding desperate, saying he needed a ride from a party in the next town over. "I'm being responsible, Vic. I'm not driving. Come get me." So I went. I drove my beat-up sedan out to the lake house where the party was raging. When I got there, Ethan wasn't waiting by the curb. He was inside holding court keys in his hand. He laughed when he saw me. "I didn't say I needed a ride home. I said I needed my sister to come party." I tried to leave, but he followed me out, insisting he drive my car to show me how well it handled. He wrestled the keys from me, playing it off as a game. I was tired. I just wanted to go home. I got in the passenger seat. That was the mistake that cost me my life. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt into a black mirror. Ethan was driving too fast, the engine whining in protest. The smell of alcohol coming off him was pungent, mixing with the damp smell of the car's upholstery. "Slow down, Ethan. Seriously," I said, gripping the door handle. "Relax, Vic. I'm in control." He slurred, one hand on the wheel, the other fumbling with his phone. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face, distracted, arrogant, untouchable. "Put the phone down!" I yelled, reaching for it. It's Caroline, he snapped, taking his eyes off the road to look at the text. She's pissed. The world disintegrated. Headlights. A horn that sounded like a scream. The sensation of the car losing traction, the sickening slide of tires on water. I saw the tree coming. I saw it through the windshield, illuminated by our high beams rushing toward us like a monster. I screamed Ethan's name, but he was still looking at his phone. The impact didn't happen in slow motion. It was instant. A wall of noise metal crumpling like paper, and then nothing. Just a void. Snap back to the ballroom. The memory of that rain-slicked road vanished, replaced by the sharp, biting pain of fresh cuts on my arms and the dull, terrifying numbness below my waist. I was lying in the wreckage of the centerpiece. My dress was soaked in water and cheap champagne. Above me, the lights of the chandeliers spun. I couldn't breathe right. The wind had been knocked out of me. But I could hear. Everyone stay calm. It was my father's voice. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't the voice of a man whose daughter lay bleeding in a pile of glass. It was his pulpit voice. Deep, resonant, controlling. He stepped into my field of vision, blocking out the light. He looked down at me, and for a second I saw pure annoyance in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his injured child. He was looking at a stain on his carpet. My daughter just slipped, he announced to the room, projecting his voice to the back corners where the donors stood frozen. She's fragile. We'll handle this as a family. I knew that tone. It hit me harder than the floor had. It was the same tone he had used in the hospital room 2.5 years ago, the night they handed me a pen and told me to sign my life away, the night they decided that my legs were a fair price to pay for Ethan's reputation. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were shaking too badly. I looked at Ethan, who was standing on the stage, smoothing his jacket, looking like the victim of an unfortunate scene. She slipped, my father repeated louder this time, daring anyone to contradict him. Lying there in the glass, I realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. The car crash hadn't been an accident, and this wasn't an accident. This was an erasure. And they weren't going to stop until there was nothing left of me to inconvenience them. Waking up in the ICU wasn't a gradual return to consciousness. It was a collision with a new, terrifying reality. The first thing I noticed wasn't the pain, but the silence. There was a screaming, white-hot agony in my chest and my neck, but below my ribcage, there was nothing. It was a silence so loud it drowned out the beeping of the monitors. I remember the doctor standing over me, Dr. Carter. She had kind eyes but a mouth set in a hard line. She didn't sugarcoat it, likely because she knew I was a nursing student. She spoke to me in the language of our trade. T9, T10, complete spinal cord injury, she said, pointing to the films on the tablet. Your spinal cord was severed on impact. We've stabilized the column with titanium rods, Victoria, but the neural pathways are gone. My nursing brain processed the data automatically: paraplegia, loss of bowel and bladder control, high risk of pressure sores, a lifetime of adaptive equipment. But my human brain, the 25-year-old girl who loved to run trails and dance at weddings, just screamed. I stared at the sheet tented over my feet. I commanded my big toe to wiggle. I begged it. Nothing. Just that heavy, suffocating static. I can't walk. I whispered, my throat raw from the intubation tube they had just removed. It is highly unlikely you will ever walk again, Dr. Carter said gently. I closed my eyes, grief washing over me like a rogue wave. My dream of being a flight nurse, of rushing into chaos to save lives, was dead. But even in that darkness, a small, stubborn spark flared. It was the part of me that had survived years of being the responsible one. I took a jagged breath. Okay, I told myself. Okay. People live full lives in wheelchairs. I can do this. I'm strong. I'll figure this out. I was preparing myself for a battle of physical rehabilitation. I didn't know the real war was about to walk through the door. My parents arrived an hour later. I expected tears. I expected my mother to rush to my side, stroking my hair, wailing about her baby girl. I expected my father to pray over me, asking God for a miracle. Instead, they walked in with the grim, calculated energy of a crisis management team. My mother's eyes were red, but not from crying for me. She looked terrified. My father looked cornered. They stood at the foot of the bed, creating a wall between me and the door. "Where's Ethan?" I croaked. "Is he okay?" "Ethan is physically fine," my father said, his voice tight. "A few bruises, a concussion." Thank God. I exhaled, genuine relief flooding my chest. I didn't want him dead, even if he had been an idiot. "But he is not fine, Victoria," my mother interjected, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. "He is in grave danger." I tried to sit up, wincing as the staples in my back pulled. "What do you mean?" My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ethan was drunk, Victoria. He was 3 times the legal limit. If the police know he was driving, if the insurance company finds out, it's over. He'll face felony charges, vehicular assault, DUI. He'll lose his scholarship, his political aspirations gone. He'll go to prison." I stared at them, the morphine making the room tilt. He was driving. He was texting. "We know," my mother said. And then she said the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. She looked at my paralyzed legs covered by the sterile hospital sheet and sighed. "But look at the situation, honey. You're already like this." The air left the room. "Like what?" "Injured," she said quickly, though she meant broken. "The damage is done. You have a long road ahead of you regardless of who was behind the wheel, but Ethan still has everything ahead of him. His whole life is waiting to launch." I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the spinal shock. "What are you asking me? If you love your family," my father said, his voice dropping into that deep pastoral cadence that made commands sound like holy obligations. "If you love your brother, you will tell the police you were driving. You'll say you lost control on the wet road. It was an accident, a moment of carelessness." "You want me to take the blame?" I choked out. "Dad, I'm paralyzed because of him." "Family sticks together," he said, grasping my hand. It didn't feel comforting. It felt like a shackle. "Sometimes one person has to sacrifice to save the whole. We can't have 2 tragedies today, Victoria. Don't let your brother's life be destroyed too. Haven't we lost enough?" They weren't asking. They were ambushing me. I was trapped in a hospital bed, pumped full of opioids, unable to run, unable to fight. They were leveraging my tragedy to salvage their golden child's reputation. "If you don't do this," my mother whispered, leaning in, her perfume cloying and sweet, "how will we explain to the church? How will we explain to the community that you sent your own brother to prison over an accident? We'll have to distance ourselves, Victoria. We can't support a daughter who is vindictive. We can't pay for the care you're going to need if our assets are tied up in legal battles for Ethan." It was a threat. Plain and simple. Take the fall or you're on your own. Before I could process the magnitude of the betrayal, the door opened. A man in a suit I didn't recognize walked in, followed by a uniformed police officer. The lawyer was a friend of my father's from the vestry. He didn't look me in the eye. "Ms. Holmes," the officer said, notebook in hand, "I need to get a statement about who was operating the vehicle." My father squeezed my hand hard, too hard. I looked at him. I looked at my mother, who was holding her breath, her eyes pleading not for me but for the lie. I looked at my legs that wouldn't move. I was 25, but in that moment I felt 12 again, taking the blame for the broken window. The conditioning was too deep, the fear of abandonment too raw. I whispered, tears leaking from my eyes. "I was driving. I was going too fast for the rain. I looked down at the radio, and then I hit the tree." The officer wrote it down. The lawyer nodded, satisfied. My father exhaled, his posture relaxing instantly. He patted my hand. "That's my good girl. You're doing the right thing. You're taking responsibility. God honors sacrifice, Victoria." He gave a little speech to the officer about how distraught I was, how we were going to handle this as a family. I lay there feeling the pen invisible in my hand, signing away my truth. I had just sacrificed my integrity, my insurance record, and my dignity to protect the man who had crippled me. They left soon after, eager to get to Ethan to tell him he was safe. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling tiles. I tried to swallow the bile rising in my throat, telling myself it was for the family. But deep in my gut, where the paralysis couldn't reach, a seed of rage cracked open. It was small, black, and hard. They hadn't just asked for a favor. They had erased me. They had looked at my shattered body and decided it was a convenient disposal site for Ethan's sins. The months that followed were a slow, grinding erasure of who I used to be. Rehab was brutal. It was a montage of sweat, humiliation, and small, hard-won victories that my family ignored. I learned how to catheterize myself. I learned how to transfer from my bed to my chair using a slide board. I learned how to balance my upper body so I wouldn't tip over when I reached for a cup of coffee. I was fighting for every inch of independence. Meanwhile, my parents were rewriting history. I heard the whispers when they finally wheeled me into church 3 months later. "Such a shame," a deacon's wife murmured. "I heard she was driving reckless, speeding in the rain." "Fell away from God," I heard. "That's what happens when you live a wild life." My parents nodded solemnly at these comments, asking for prayers for my soul. They framed Ethan as the hero. He was the saintly brother who had stayed by my side and forgiven me for crashing the car and almost killing him. Ethan visited me in rehab a handful of times. He never thanked me. He never looked me in the eye and acknowledged what I had done. He treated my injury like an inconvenience. He'd sit on the edge of the therapy mat while I struggled to do push-ups, checking his watch. "You know," he said once, watching me struggle to load my chair into the car, "that chair is actually kind of handy. We can pile the coolers on your lap when we go to the lake. You're like a human mule now." He laughed. He thought it was funny. My mother was worse. She didn't like the reality of the injury. She wanted the inspiring disabled daughter, not the real one who needed ramps and bathroom accommodations. "People think you're exaggerating, Victoria," she told me one afternoon in her kitchen, watching me transfer out of the car. "Maybe you don't need the chair all the time. Dr. Carter said you had stabilized. Don't lean into it just to get attention, honey. It looks needy." "I'm paralyzed, Mom," I snapped. "I'm not leaning into anything. I'm trying to move." "Well, you don't have to make such a production of it," she sniffed. "Ethan is so stressed about his campaign launch. He doesn't need to be worrying about you making scenes." They were slowly sanding down the edges of my existence. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted the chair to disappear, the guilt to disappear, and the truth to disappear. They wanted me to be a prop in the background of Ethan's success story, silent, smiling, and grateful they hadn't abandoned me. But the rage seed was growing. It had roots now. 2 years passed. I finished nursing school online, fighting tooth and nail to get my degree, though I couldn't work the floor anymore. I was rebuilding a life in the shadows they had cast over me. Then the invitation came. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering. "Please join us for the engagement celebration of Ethan Holmes and Caroline Ridgway." It was also a fundraiser, a political launch, a coronation for the prince. I turned the card over. At the bottom, in my mother's jagged, frantic handwriting, "We need you there. Don't make this harder on the family than it already is. Smile." My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Wear something that doesn't make you look like a victim. We need good optics." I looked at the invitation. I looked at my black carbon fiber chair. I looked at the scar running down my spine. They wanted me to show up and play the part of the redeemed sinner, the grateful sister. I wheeled myself over to the window. I wasn't going to wear something to hide. I wasn't going to smile. If they wanted me there, they were going to get all of me. The chair, the truth, the rage. I didn't know yet that the night of the party would be the end of everything. I just knew I was done being erased. The invitation had sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, mocking me with its gold leaf script, "Ethan and Caroline." I had debated burning it. I had debated calling them and screaming that I would never be part of their prop department again. But in the end, silence felt like submission. Staying home felt like letting them win, letting them erase me completely. If I didn't show up, I was the bitter invalid they claimed I was. If I did show up, I could at least force them to look at me. I chose to go, but I chose to go on my terms. I arrived at the country club alone. The valet looked uncertainly at my hand controls as I parked my adapted van myself, refusing his help. I assembled my chair on the asphalt click-snap lock, transferred over, and smoothed down my dress. It was a soft, dusty blue, chosen to adhere to their pastels and pearls theme, but my chair was stark matte black. I hadn't tied ribbons on the frame. I hadn't covered the wheels. It was a piece of medical equipment, not a float in a parade. As I rolled into the ballroom, the air conditioning hit my skin cold and sharp. The room was a sea of cream linen and white hydrangeas. It was beautiful, expensive, and suffocating. I kept my head high, pushing with long, smooth strokes. The whispers started almost immediately. In a small town like ours, where the Holmes family was practically royalty, my tragedy was public property. But the version they knew was the one my parents had sold them. "That's the sister," I heard a woman murmur behind a fan. "The one from the accident. I heard she's been milking it for disability checks." A man's voice replied, low and confidential. "Ethan said she could be doing more, but she likes the sympathy." I gripped my push rims tighter, my knuckles whitening. "Keep moving. Don't react." My mother intercepted me near the gift table. She looked immaculate in champagne silk, her smile tight enough to snap a violin string. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, her eyes darting around the room to see who was watching. "You made it," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "And you brought that chair, the everyday one." "It's my legs, Mom. It's not an accessory," I said calmly. "It just ruins the aesthetic, Victoria," she hissed, adjusting the strap of my dress with a little too much force. "We have a white wicker one we rented for the photos. It's in the coat check." "I can't push a wicker chair, Mom. It's heavy and the rims are decorative. I'm staying in this." She sighed, a sound of long-suffering martyrdom. "Fine. Just try to stay out of the main eye lines until we need you. We don't want to distract from Caroline." She signaled to a waiter who promptly guided me away from the main family table near the stage. I watched as he led me to a table in the back corner near the kitchen doors. When I looked back at the head table, I saw my name card had been removed. In the spot where my wheelchair should have been, there was a regular banquet chair. They had literally removed my place. I sat in the back, sipping sparkling water, watching my brother work the room. He was in his element, shaking hands, clapping donors on the back, looking every inch the future state representative. He didn't look like a man who had nearly killed his sister while texting. He looked like a savior. A woman approached me, Mrs. Gable, the deacon's wife. She smelled of lilac and judgment. "Victoria, dear," she cooed, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're so strong coming out like this. But don't you think staying in that thing keeps you from healing?" I read an article about faith healing. If you just had enough faith to stand. "My spinal cord is severed, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice flat. "Faith doesn't regrow nerves." "Well, not with that attitude," she tutted, patting my head like I was a toddler. "Ethan says you've been depressed. Maybe you're holding on to the injury because you're afraid to face the world again." I was about to tell Mrs. Gable exactly where she could shove her faith healing when a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. My father. "Mrs. Gable, so good to see you," he boomed, turning his back to me to block me from view. "Enjoying the party?" He ushered her away, then turned back to me. His smile vanished. The mask fell. "No scenes, Victoria," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I saw you getting worked up. This night is about Ethan, not you. We have already sacrificed enough for your situation. Do not embarrass us in front of the donors." "I'm sitting in the corner, Dad. I'm not doing anything." "Your face is doing something," he snapped. "Fix it." He walked away. I sat there shaking with suppressed adrenaline. I wanted to leave. I wanted to roll out the door and never look back. But then I saw Ethan on the stage raising a glass, basking in the applause. If I left, I was the villain. If I stayed, I was the victim. I decided to be neither. I would be the witness. "Time for the family photo," Ethan announced into the microphone, his cheeks flushed with drink and triumph. "Mom, Dad Caroline, and my little sister Vic, get up here." The spotlight swung to me. The room applauded politely. I had no choice. I rolled toward the stage, the black chair cutting a path through the white dresses. Getting onto the stage required going up a temporary ramp on the side. It was steep, not up to code. I had to strain my biceps burning to push myself up while everyone watched. No one offered to help. They just watched the struggle. When I finally made it to the top, breathless, I positioned myself on the end. "Squeeze in," the photographer called out. My mother leaned into my ear. "If you could just stand for one picture, Victoria, people wouldn't judge our family so harshly. Just for a second. Lean on the podium." "Mom, I can't," I whispered back, humiliated. "I don't have balance." Ethan heard me. He turned his eyes glassy. The alcohol had stripped away the polished candidate veneer, leaving the bully underneath. "Everyone knows you're not that bad, Vic," he said loudly, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Stop milking it for the cameras. It's my engagement. Just stand up." "Ethan, stop," I said, panic rising in my chest. "I physically can't." "Sure you can," he smirked. "You just need a little motivation. Prove them wrong." He moved fast. Before I could lock my brakes, before I could back away, he was behind me. "Ethan, don't!" I cried out, but it was too late. He grabbed me under the arms. His grip was bruising. "Up we go," he shouted like he was playing a game with a child. He yanked. My body left the safety of the chair. My legs, dead weight and useless, dragged across the floor. I felt the terrifying sensation of being airborne without control. My core muscles, the ones that keep a person upright, were non-existent. As he hauled me up, my torso swung forward violently. Ethan stumbled. He was drunk, his coordination shot. He couldn't hold my dead weight. His grip slipped on the silk of my dress. "Whoops," he slurred. He dropped me. I didn't just fall. I pitched forward off the edge of the riser. Time seemed to warp, stretching out into a horrified slow motion. I saw the faces in the front row, mouths opening in shock. I saw the table directly below me laden with heavy crystal centerpieces and lit candles. "Protect the neck," my brain screamed. I tucked my chin, but I couldn't stop the momentum. I crashed into the table. The sound was a cacophony of destruction, glass shattering, metal groaning, the heavy thud of my body hitting the wood, and then the floor. Water from the vases soaked me instantly. A candle singed my hair before rolling away. Pain flared sharp, hot slices from the glass, cutting into my arms and face. My shoulders screamed in protest. But the scariest part was the immobility. I was face down in a pile of wreckage, and I couldn't move my legs to right myself. I was a rag doll. The room went dead silent. The music cut out. Then someone screamed. "Oh my God, Ethan, what did you do?" Caroline shrieked. I lay there gasping, waiting for my father's voice, waiting for the spin. "Everyone stay calm," my father yelled. "She slipped." But this time the narrative didn't hold. A figure pushed through the crowd, moving with a speed and purpose that cut through the frozen bystanders. It was a woman in a dark navy dress, Dr. Layla Carter. She was a trauma surgeon, highly respected, and she had been the one to read my scans 2 years ago. She was also a neighbor of Caroline's parents. She dropped to her knees beside me, ignoring the glass shards that pressed into her dress. "Don't move her," she barked, her voice commanding the room. She placed her hands firmly on either side of my head, stabilizing my cervical spine. "Victoria, can you hear me? Blink twice if you can hear me." I blinked, tears mixing with the water and blood on my face. "Okay. Don't try to move," she said, her eyes locking onto mine with intense focus. Ethan stumbled to the edge of the stage, looking down, pale and horrified. I was just helping her stand. She fell. She gave up." Dr. Carter whipped her head around, her glare lethal. She spoke loudly, her voice projecting to the back of the silent ballroom. She has a known T9 T10 complete spinal cord injury. I read the imaging myself after the crash. She has no core stability. If her neck is hurt, that is on whoever just yanked a paraplegic woman out of her chair. A collective gasp went through the room. The whispers stopped. The judgment stopped. The lie cracked. But they said she was faking, someone whispered near the front, horrified. They said she could walk if she wanted to. She cannot walk, Dr. Carter snapped, not looking away from me. And she certainly cannot stand for a photo op. Someone call 911, now. My father tried to step in. Now, Layla, let's not make a scene. We can handle this. You will step back, Daniel, Dr. Carter said, her voice like steel. This is a medical emergency. Step back. For the first time in my life, I saw my father hesitate. He looked at the crowd. He saw the donors, the church members, the reporter from the local paper holding his camera. He saw the doubt in their eyes. He saw the image crumbling. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. I lay there, Dr. Carter's hands holding me steady, feeling the cold water soaking my dress. I looked up at Ethan. He looked small. He looked terrified. A paramedic team rushed in carrying a backboard and a collar. They swarmed around me, professional and quick. As one of them knelt down to check my vitals, he leaned close. "Ma'am," he said quietly, glancing at the bruising already forming under my arms where Ethan had grabbed me. "We have to report this. Do you want to press charges? This looks like assault." I looked at my mother. She was mouthing the word, please. She was begging me to swallow it again, to take the pain and hide it. I looked at my father. His eyes were cold, warning me. Remember who you are. Remember what you owe us. Then I looked at Dr. Carter, who was still holding my hand, her grip solid and real. I felt the rage seed in my gut finally bloom. It wasn't a flower. It was a sword. I took a breath, tasting blood and freedom. Maybe this is the last time they ever ambush me. I looked the paramedic in the eye. "Yes," I said clearly. "I want to make a statement." The ceiling tiles of the hospital room were identical to the ones I had stared at 2.5 years ago, but the woman lying in the bed was different. I wasn't 25 anymore. I wasn't afraid of the silence. And this time I wasn't waiting for permission to speak. I had a mild concussion, a landscape of purple bruising across my shoulders where Ethan had grabbed me, and 20 stitches in my arm from the glass. But my spine, the titanium-reinforced column that held me together, was intact. Dr. Carter had stayed until the CT scans came back clear, her presence a shield against the chaos outside my door. She sat by my bed now, scrolling through her phone, looking like a sentinel in navy silk. "You called him out," I murmured, my voice raspy. "I heard you." Dr. Carter looked up. "Someone had to. It was assault, Victoria, plain and simple. I wasn't going to let them spin it as a medical episode." A knock at the door interrupted us. It wasn't my parents. It was a detective I didn't recognize, accompanied by a young assistant district attorney. They looked serious, the kind of serious that doesn't care about local politics or church hierarchies. "Ms. Holmes," the detective said, pulling up a chair. "I'm Detective Miller. We have the incident at the country club on video. Several guests were recording the speeches on their phones. We need to review it with you." He held up a tablet. I didn't want to watch, but I forced myself. On the screen, the ballroom looked glowing and perfect. I saw myself small and seated in black carbon fiber. I saw Ethan, flushed and arrogant, loom over me. I saw the grab, violent, hasty, disrespectful. And then I saw the fall. It was worse on video. It looked like he had discarded me. The gasp from the room was audible, followed by the crash. Then a voice on the recording, clear as a bell. He shoved her. "That wasn't assistance," Detective Miller said, setting the tablet down. "That was reckless endangerment at best, aggravated assault at worst. Given your disability, the law takes this very seriously." I was about to answer when the door flew open. My parents didn't knock. They burst in, bringing a gust of frantic energy with them. My father's tie was undone. My mother's makeup was smudged. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 10 hours. They didn't look at my bandages. They didn't look at the IV in my arm. They looked at the detective, then at me. "Thank God you're awake," my father said, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the threat level. "Victoria, we need to talk. Alone." "You can speak in front of Detective Miller," I said, my voice cool. "I have nothing to hide." "Victoria, please," my mother pleaded, rushing to the bedside but stopping short of touching me. "This is a nightmare. The internet is already talking. Someone posted a video. Ethan's campaign page is being flooded with hateful comments. It's destroying him." "Is he okay?" I asked, testing them. "He's a wreck," she cried. "He's terrified. He was just trying to include you to have a nice family moment, and now they're calling him a monster." "He yanked a paraplegic woman out of her wheelchair, Mrs. Holmes," Dr. Carter said from the corner, her voice dry. My father ignored her, focusing his laser intensity on me. "Victoria, listen to me. If you press charges, if you let this go forward, you will destroy this family. The church will tear itself apart. Do you want that on your conscience? Being the reason your brother goes to jail." "He did this to himself, Dad." "He made a mistake," my father roared, then lowered his voice, trembling with suppressed rage. "We have supported you. We have cared for you. If you turn on us now, we will have no choice but to cut off all financial assistance. The apartment, the van insurance, it stops. You'll be on your own." It was the same playbook, the same threats, the same emotional extortion. Sign the paper. Take the blame. Save the golden child. But I looked at them, and I didn't feel the old fear. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I remembered the night of the car crash, the rain, the text message, the steering wheel in Ethan's hands. I remembered lying in the trauma bay while they plotted to swap the driver. I remembered 2 years of being told to smile, to hide, to be grateful for the scraps of their affection. I realized then that they had never loved me. They loved the role I played. They loved the scapegoat who kept the altar clean for their idol. "I'm not signing anything this time," I said quietly. "What?" My mother froze. I turned to Detective Miller. "You want my statement?" "Here it is. My brother was drunk. He has a history of reckless behavior while intoxicated. He grabbed me against my will after I told him I couldn't stand. He threw me." "Victoria!" my father shouted. And I continued speaking over him, my voice gaining strength. "If you want to establish a pattern of behavior, you should pull the file on the car accident from 2.5 years ago, the one that paralyzed me." The room went dead silent. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father went pale, a true waxen gray. "I wasn't driving that night," I told the detective, holding his gaze. "Ethan was. He was drunk. He was texting. My parents coerced me into taking the blame to protect his scholarship and his reputation. I was under the influence of heavy pain medication and under duress." Detective Miller's pen stopped moving. He looked from me to my parents, his expression hardening into professional predatory interest. "That's insurance fraud, Ms. Holmes. Filing a false police report, coercion. And it establishes a motive for the current assault, silencing a victim." "She's lying," my father sputtered, but he was backing away toward the door. "She's on drugs. She's hysterical." "Get out," Dr. Carter said, standing up. "Now." They left, but the look my father gave me wasn't one of a disappointed parent. It was the look you give an enemy. By the next morning, the story had exploded. The headline in the local paper wasn't about the engagement. It was local pastor's son accused of assaulting disabled sister at fundraiser. The video was viral. The community reaction was swift and violent. The church split down the middle. There were those who defended Pastor Holmes, citing family values and calling me a bitter, ungrateful daughter who was trying to ruin a good man's life for attention. But there was another side, a side I hadn't expected. The disability community, local activists, and people who had simply seen the video and felt the visceral horror of it rallied around me. I lay in my hospital bed reading comments from strangers. I'm a wheelchair user, and this is my nightmare. That brother is a predator. The way the parents are spinning this is gaslighting 101. I wasn't alone in the silence anymore. The truth was out, and it was loud. 2 days later, the assistant district attorney returned, bringing with her a woman in a sharp gray suit. Victoria, this is Alicia Moreno, the ADA said. She's a civil rights attorney. We thought you should speak to her. Alicia didn't look like a church lady. She looked like a shark who ate church ladies for breakfast. She sat down and looked at me with frank appraisal. The DA is going for aggravated assault on a disabled person, Alicia said, her voice crisp. With the video and the medical testimony, they can push for 5 to 10 years. But criminal court only punishes him. It doesn't fix what they took from you. What do you mean? I mean the last 2 years, Alicia said. The medical bills you paid, the pain and suffering, the lost wages, the fraud they coerced you into, which likely denied you a payout from the insurance company because you were the at-fault driver. We can file a civil suit, Victoria. We can expose the entire pattern, the crash, the cover-up, the gaslighting. We can go after them for everything. I hesitated. The old programming flared up. Don't be vindictive. Family sticks together. I don't want to just hurt them, I said. I'm not doing this for revenge. It's not revenge, Alicia corrected me. It's restitution. They stole your legs, then they stole your voice, and then they tried to steal your dignity. Justice isn't just about jail time. It's about making them pay the cost of the damage they caused so you can afford to live a free life. I thought about the van I was struggling to pay for. I thought about the accessible apartment I wanted but couldn't afford. I thought about the way Ethan had laughed about piling coolers on my lap. Do it, I said. File the suit. The legal machinery moved fast. Confronted with the reopened investigation into the car crash and the undeniable video of the ballroom assault, the Holmes family defense began to crumble. My parents were scrambling. I heard through the grapevine that they were liquidating assets, hiring criminal defense lawyers, trying to put out fires that were burning down their reputation. A week later, just before I was discharged, Alicia came back. She looked grim but satisfied. Your parents just called the DA, she told me. They want to talk plea deal. They know they can't win a trial. If the car crash fraud comes out in open court, your father loses the church. Your mother goes down for conspiracy, and Ethan goes away for a long time. What are they offering? Ethan pleads guilty to aggravated assault. He does time. They pay you a significant settlement in the civil case to close the book on the fraud. But... Alicia paused, tapping her pen on her notebook. They have one condition for the plea. What is it? They want a public statement from you. They want you to say on the record that Ethan has always been a good brother, that he loves you, and that he never meant to hurt you. They want you to validate his character so he has a chance at a life after prison. I stared out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. They still wanted me to fix the window. They still wanted me to smooth over the cracks so they could pretend the house wasn't rotten. They were willing to pay me to go to jail to lose money, but they couldn't bear to lose the image. They want me to lie one last time, I said. Essentially, Alicia said. It's the only way they save face. I looked at Alicia. I thought about the girl who had signed that paper in the trauma unit, terrified and alone. I wasn't her anymore. Tell them no, I said. If you refuse, they might pull the deal. It could go to trial. It will be ugly, Alicia warned. Let it be ugly. I said, a smile touching my lips for the first time in days. They want me to say he's a good brother. They want absolution. I shook my head. Tell them that the price of my silence has gone up. It's not for sale anymore. They haven't understood anything. Yet. The knock on the door of my temporary apartment was hesitant, lacking the authoritarian pounding I had grown up with. I was living in a ground-floor unit arranged by a local disability advocacy nonprofit, a space with wide doorways and a roll-in shower things my parents had claimed were too expensive to install in their own home. When I opened the door, I didn't see the pillars of the community who had commanded respect in grocery store aisles. I saw two people who were fraying at the seams. My mother's hair, usually lacquered into a helmet of perfection, was loose and thinning. My father's suit hung off him, the collar unstarched. They looked older. They looked desperate. "May we come in?" my father asked. It was the first time in 27 years he had asked my permission to enter a room. I backed up, letting my wheels turn silently on the linoleum. "You have 5 minutes." They stood awkwardly in the small living room. They didn't sit. They looked at the modest furniture, the medical supplies stacked in the corner, the life I was building from scratch. "Victoria!" My mother started, her voice trembling. "We need to end this. This court case. It's bleeding us dry. The lawyers, the press. It has to stop." "Then tell Ethan to plead guilty," I said, parking my chair and locking the brakes. "He wants to," she said. "But the DA is asking for too much time. And the civil suit. Victoria, you're suing your own flesh and blood." "I'm suing the people who defrauded me," I corrected. My father stepped forward, trying to summon his old presence. "We can work this out without the courts. We can make an arrangement. If you drop the civil suit and ask the DA for leniency, we will write you into the will. You'll get the house when we pass. We'll help with your medical bills now, strictly under the table. No lawyers." I almost laughed. It was tragic. Even now, facing the ruin of their reputation, they thought they could buy me with promises of a future inheritance. They thought I was still the girl waiting for a scrap of approval. "I don't want to be in your will," I said coldly. "I don't want to wait until you die to get the support I needed 2 years ago. I needed you when I woke up in that hospital bed. You chose a new car and a campaign fund instead." My father's face darkened. The desperation curdled back into the threat I recognized. "You are being selfish, Victoria. If you send your brother to prison, if you bankrupt us with this lawsuit, we will never forgive you. You will have no family left. You will be an orphan in this world." "I've been an orphan since the night you told me to lie to the police," I said. "My 5 minutes are up. Get out." They left, but the war wasn't over. It had just moved to the negotiation table. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room with Alicia Moreno and the assistant district attorney. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and high-stakes maneuvering. "They're cracking," Alicia said, sliding a document across the mahogany table. "The threat of reopening the car crash investigation has terrified them. If that fraud comes to light, your father loses the church pension, the parsonage, everything. They are ready to deal." "What's the offer?" I asked. "Ethan pleads guilty to aggravated assault," the ADA explained. "We dropped the insurance fraud charges against the parents to spare the county a year-long trial, but the plea comes with teeth. Ethan serves 2 years in state prison. No probation, no suspended sentence. 2 years hard time." "And the restitution," Alicia interjected. "Full settlement of the civil claims," she said, tapping the paper. "Medical costs past and future, pain and suffering, punitive damages. $450,000. The number hung in the air. It was a staggering amount for a family like mine, wealthy in status, but middle class in assets. "There's a catch," Alicia added, her eyes gleaming with a shark-like intensity. "We told them the money has to be wired to an escrow account before the sentencing hearing. If the funds aren't there by 9:00 a.m. on the day of court, the deal is void and we go to trial on everything, including the fraud." "They don't have that kind of cash lying around," I said. "No." Alicia smiled grimly. "They don't. They'll have to bleed for it. They'll have to sacrifice for it. Just like you did." And sacrifice, they did. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched from a distance as the facade of the Holmes family was dismantled brick by brick. In a small town, you can't hide a fire sale. The for sale sign went up on the lake cabin first, the place where we had spent summers, the place where Ethan had been the king of the dock while I fetched him sodas. It sold below market value for a quick cash close. Then the luxury SUV, the one my mother drove to church to look the part of the First Lady, disappeared, replaced by a decade-old sedan. But the final blow was the parsonage. Since the church owned the house, my father couldn't sell it. Instead, word got out that he had taken a predatory high-interest personal loan against his retirement fund and had practically begged the church board for an advance on his salary. He was mortgaging his future to pay for his past sins. The community watched it happen. The narrative shifted. They weren't the perfect family anymore. They were a family in freefall, frantically stripping the copper wiring out of the walls to save their son. For the first time, the sacrifice wasn't being extracted from my body. It was coming from their comfort, their status, their golden years. A week before the sentencing, my phone rang. It was a number I had blocked, but he was calling from a lawyer's line. I accepted. Vic. Ethan's voice sounded small, broken. Hello, Ethan. I wanted to talk before court, he stammered. Mom and Dad said you wouldn't see me. I won't. Vic, please. I'm scared. Prison, I can't do prison. I'm not built for that. He was crying now, the wet, gasping sobs of a man who has never faced a consequence in his life. I never meant to hurt you. You know that, right? At the party, I was just drunk. And the car. Mom and Dad told me to let you take the blame. They said it was the only way. They pressured me, Vic. I listened to him unravel. He was doing exactly what he had always done, pointing the finger. It was the alcohol. It was the parents. It was the pressure. You're 30 years old, Ethan, I said, my voice steady. You didn't just threaten my body. You threatened my whole life. You let them erase me for 2 years to keep your hands clean. You watched me struggle to learn how to dress myself again, and you laughed about it. I'm sorry, he wailed. I'll do anything. Please just tell the judge. Tell him I'm a good guy. If you ask for probation, he might give it to me. He wanted me to save him again. He wanted the sister who cleaned up the glass. I won't lie for you, Ethan. Not anymore. Please. But, I said, pausing, I'm not them. I don't want to destroy you just to make myself feel big. I'm writing a victim impact statement. I'm not going to ask for the maximum sentence. I'm not going to ask for you to rot. You aren't. No. I want accountability, Ethan. Not annihilation. I want you to go away long enough to understand that you aren't the center of the universe. And when you come out, I want you to stay away from me. I hung up before he could thank me. I didn't want his gratitude. I wanted his absence. The day of the sentencing was gray and rainy, fitting for a funeral of the life we used to have. The courtroom was packed. Half the church was there along with the press. Alicia leaned over to me as the bailiff called the court to order. The wire transfer just cleared, she whispered. 450,000. It's done. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. My medical debt was gone. My future care was secured. The van, the apartment, the freedom, it was mine. Ethan sat at the defense table. He looked hollowed out, wearing a suit that now seemed too big for him. My parents sat in the front row behind him. My mother was weeping silently into a tissue. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in stone. When the judge asked for the victim impact statement, Alicia wheeled me to the front of the room. I turned my chair so I wasn't just facing the judge, but slightly angled toward the gallery. I wanted them to hear me. I unfolded the paper in my lap. My hands didn't shake. Your Honor, I began. 2 years ago, I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs. But the most painful part of that day wasn't the injury. It was the realization that my family saw my paralysis not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a utility to be used. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. I was ambushed, I continued. I was coerced into lying to protect my brother's reputation. For 2 years, I was told that my role in this family was to be the vessel for their sins. I was told that love meant erasure. I was told that family sticks together, but I learned that what they meant was that I must stick to the shadows so my brother could shine. I took a breath. The night at the country club wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of a lifetime of being treated like a prop. When a person is viewed as an object, it becomes very easy to throw them away. I looked at Ethan. He had his head in his hands. However, I said clearly, I refuse to let their cruelty make me cruel. I don't want vengeance, Your Honor. Vengeance binds you to the person you hate. I want boundaries. I want freedom. I want my life back. I ask that the court accept the plea deal. 2 years is enough time for a man to find his own conscience if he has one. I am done carrying his. The gavel came down an hour later. Ethan Holmes guilty. 2 years in state prison. As the bailiffs moved to cuff him, the sound of the metal clicking shut echoed through the room. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father stood up looking around as if searching for someone to fix this, but there was no one left to call. The check had cleared. The deal was signed. I rolled out of the courtroom, Alicia walking beside me. The air outside was cool and wet, smelling of rain and asphalt, the same smell as the night of the crash. But this time I wasn't afraid. My parents were waiting on the sidewalk. They must have slipped out a side door to catch me. They looked like ghosts. Victoria, my mother said. Her voice was thin, stripped of all its power. We sold the cabin. We sold the cars. We mortgaged the house. We have nothing. She looked at me with wet red eyes. If you take this money, we will have nothing left. We are ruined. I stopped my chair. I looked at the woman who had told me my wheelchair ruined her aesthetic. I looked at the man who had told me I was a stain on his image. You're not ruined, I said calmly. You're just paying your bill. We're your parents, she cried. How can you do this? I looked at them one last time, feeling the final tether snap. You took everything from me a long time ago, I said, my voice low and final. You took my legs. You took my truth. You took my trust. I'm not taking your money to hurt you. I'm just taking my name back. I turned my chair away from them and rolled toward the van, leaving them standing on the wet pavement, smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror. The air in Denver is different than it was in North Carolina. It's thinner, sharper, and lacks that heavy, humid weight that used to settle in my lungs like guilt. Out here, you have to breathe intentionally. You have to work a little harder for your oxygen, but when you get it, it feels cleaner. I adjusted the hand controls of my van, easing the gas as we climbed the winding road up toward the lookout point. The van was a beast, a customized, fully accessible sprinter with a lift that didn't rattle and a suspension that didn't jar my spine over every pothole. I had paid for it in cash. It was the first check I wrote from the settlement money after paying off the mountain of medical debt my parents had left me with. Every time I drove it, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. My parents had mortgaged their image to buy my silence. I had used their money to buy my mobility. You okay over there? You've got that look, a voice said from the passenger seat. I glanced over at Marcus. He was watching the tree line blur past his feet, propped up on the dashboard in a way that would have given my mother a coronary. Marcus was a landscape architect I'd met 6 months ago at a dog park where my service dog in training had enthusiastically tangled his leash with Marcus's golden retriever. He didn't know the Victoria who was the broken daughter or the political scandal. He just knew Vic, the woman who beat him at trivia, and had a dark sense of humor about accessibility ramps. I'm good, I said, smiling. Just thinking about the altitude. We're climbing pretty high, he noted. Views are going to be insane today. 2 years had passed since the courtroom. 2 years of aggressive physical therapy, not to fix me, but to make me strong within my new reality. I had moved west 3 months after the sentencing, craving a landscape that didn't know my last name. I used the rest of the restitution to buy a ground-floor condo in the city and re-enrolled in school. I wasn't nursing anymore, that dream had died on the wet asphalt, but I was studying social work, specializing in disability advocacy. I worked part-time at a nonprofit that helped people navigate the labyrinth of Social Security benefits and housing discrimination. It was grueling work, but every time I helped someone secure a ramp or fight a denial letter, I felt like I was winning a small skirmish in a larger war. We pulled into the gravel lot at the Overlook. It was crowded with our people, my chosen tribe. There was Sarah, a single mom who lived down the hall from me, unloading a cooler of drinks. There were David and Michael, the couple who ran the community garden, setting up a portable grill. And there was Leo, a double amputee I'd met at the adaptive gym, laughing loudly as he maneuvered his sport chair over the uneven ground. I parked and deployed the lift. The mechanical whir was a familiar comfort. As I rolled out, the wind hit my face, smelling of pine needles and charcoal. "Need a push?" Marcus asked, hopping out. It was a casual offer, devoid of the panic or pity my family always projected. "I got it," I said, gripping my rims. "Just grab the chips." "You got it, boss." We joined the group. It wasn't a formal affair. There were no white linens, no seating charts, no hushed whispers about optics. We were just people eating burnt hot dogs and laughing too loud. When I dropped a napkin, 3 people didn't rush to pick it up to save me from struggling. They just let me pick it up. It was here, surrounded by the smell of barbecue sauce and the sound of my friends arguing about baseball, that I finally let myself think about the mail I had received yesterday. My mail forwarding from the old address still caught a few stragglers. Usually it was junk mail or old alumni newsletters. But yesterday 2 envelopes had arrived. The first was plain white, bought from a drugstore. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from Ethan. He had been out of prison for 3 months. He was living in a halfway house 2 counties over, working construction, framing houses he would never afford to live in. I had sat at my kitchen island, coffee in hand, and read the letter. It wasn't a beg, it wasn't a manifesto, it was short. "Vic, I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that you were right, about everything. I spent 2 years thinking about the car and the party and how easy it was for me to let Mom and Dad erase you just so I didn't have to look at what I did. I was a coward. I'm trying not to be one anymore. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Ethan." I had read it twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt a quiet sort of closure. He was finally carrying his own weight. That was all I had ever asked for. The second letter was different. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored linen stock, the kind my mother used for thank you notes. The return address was embossed. Even after the fire sale of their assets, they still clung to the stationery of their former life. I hadn't opened it. I stood over my shredder, holding the envelope up to the light. I could imagine the contents. Guilt trips about how hard their life was now, Bible verses taken out of context, pleas to come home and heal the family, or maybe threats disguised as concern. It didn't matter what was inside. Their words no longer held currency in my economy. I had dropped the envelope unopened into the shredder. The machine roared to life, teeth gnashing, and I watched the cream linen turn into confetti. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. "Earth to Vic!" Leo called out, tossing a frisbee that landed in my lap. "You zoning out on us?" "Just admiring the view," I lied, tossing it back. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Rockies in streaks of violet and burnt orange. The light caught the matte black carbon of my wheelchair, making it glow softly. I wasn't hiding it. I wasn't draping a blanket over my legs to make the able-bodied people comfortable. I was taking up space. Marcus came over and sat on the bumper of the van next to me, handing me a soda. He looked out at the horizon, then back at me. He knew bits and pieces of my story enough to know why I didn't talk to my parents enough to know that family was a loaded word for me. "You ever think about going back?" he asked quietly. "Just to see?" I looked at him, then at the group of misfits and survivors laughing around the fire. Sarah was showing Michael pictures of her kid. Leo was trying to balance a beer can on his forehead. They were messy and loud and real. They didn't love me because I made them look good. They didn't love me because I sacrificed myself for them. They loved me because I showed up. "No," I said, the word easy on my tongue. "I don't." "Do you miss them?" "I miss who I thought they were," I admitted. "I miss the idea of them. But I don't miss being a ghost in my own life." I turned my chair to face the sunset fully. The wind kicked up, blowing my hair back. I felt the titanium rods in my spine, the stiffness in my hips, the permanent changes to my body. They were part of me, but they didn't define me. My parents had tried to write a tragedy where I was the victim, the cautionary tale, the collateral damage. But I had taken the pen out of their hands. The night my brother shoved me off that stage, I told Marcus, they thought they'd broken me for good. They thought that if they humiliated me enough, I'd just disappear. I gestured to the mountains, to the van I drove, to the friends who were currently singing an off-key rendition of a classic rock song. They didn't realize they'd just pushed me into my own life. I took a sip of my soda, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks. The darkness was coming, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had my own light. Victoria finally found her voice, and the freedom to define her own future, leaving the shadows of her family behind for good. If you found satisfaction in her justice, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. What would you have done in her position? We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.